Imagine waiting 2 weeks to know if you got a like or not, or a thumbs up. In the decades before the internet, people made comics, and we reached out to each other. What was it like? This is the Sequential Artists Workshop, and these are the 90s mini comics oral history archives.
This is David Lasky. Around 1991, I received a mini comic in the mail from Yugoslavia from a creator named Sasha Rakezic, who works under the pen name Aleksandar Zograf. I sent one of my minis back in trade, becoming one of many, many people who corresponded with Sasha and read his comics, which he continued to make through the years of civil war in the Balkans. He is probably the leading cartoonist in Serbia and is one of the world's great comics creators. We hope you enjoy his history of making comics before the internet.
My name is Sasha Rakizic, and I draw comics under the pseudonym of Aleksandar Zograf. I'm recording this on April 17th, 2024, at my home in Pančevo, Serbia. So I live in Serbia. I published in the 90s, mostly in the States, which is kind of funny, but I actually never left my homeland. In the 90s, in the pre-internet era, I published Alas comics. It's a mini comic which I exchanged mostly for the publications from the US. And it was all done as a do-it-yourself product way back in Yugoslavia or Serbia. My homeland was then going through the civil war, and it was torn apart at that time when I actually started to work on these comics. So these comics were like my thoughts about what was going on around me, basically. Sometimes it was more direct, speaking about the things that I can see in my neighborhood, and sometimes it was more like recordings of dreams and interesting and funny thoughts that I had at these days. About comics production. I make my comics in a traditional way, using just pen and ink, and in recent time I'm coloring with Photoshop. Usually since I'm coming from the background of being a journalist and a writer, I mostly write my scripts and just then slowly put them into sketches and finally make the final drawings. And I was already publishing my work in Yugoslavia way back in the mid-80s, but I started in the early 90s. I started to make mini comics in English, and I was basically doing it on a very small format, and it was very, just in order, actually for a practical reason. It was because I was really penniless at that time. It was necessary for me to send the packages with my comics the cheapest way. So I, here in this part of the world, maybe it's like that in the States, I don't know, but if your comics are under 20 gram ratio, you can send it by the cheapest rate. So I did it like that. I used a simple A4 format and made a little booklet, just one page photocopy it on both sides, and I would send it as a simple letter, which was under 20 gram. And so it was really the cheapest rate to send your work. And it was good also because it was so miniature, and you had to think about expressing everything you want, and in a very small and handy format. The first comic that I did this way was called Alas Comics number 1. I printed it originally, I think, in maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 copies, and it was meant to be sent through the mail, and I did it in order to actually exchange it for the works by the other authors in the States, because at that moment I was very curious about what was going on the scene. It is because I was somehow realizing that the most interesting scene was comic scene was actually the American one, and I can tell you that at that time, late 80s, early 90s, Europe was pretty conventional, pretty conservative, and there were not much alternative comics even in Western Europe, let alone Balkans, where I used to live. So the American scene was something exciting and something that has had a long history of development ever since the 1960s, basically, when the underground comics scene has started. And that American underground thing was very much connected with the war in Vietnam, which was going on at that time in the 60s. And something similar was going on in my country, in Serbia, in Yugoslavia and then Serbia. We were going through the civil war. You had to escape the draft, and it was very dramatic in many ways. And at times like that are actually good for rethinking about the place where you live and questioning your role in the society and the society itself. So in some way it was similar to what was going on in the States in the 1960s. And we didn't have that much information about the undergrounds in the States. At least I didn't know that much about that, but I was connected with the other scenes, connected with mail art, maybe shortly, but anyway, I understood how important it is to self-publish. And also I was one of the first, in the late 70s, early 80s, I was one of the first people in Yugoslavia who started to self-publish. And I did my fanzine, which was called Kreten, which means Cretin. And it was basically connected with the new wave music scene at that moment, and it was a very exciting moment in this part of the world. Anyway, I was writing about that, doing a little bit of illustration as well. But so I was not the very concept of do-it-yourself was not something which was so much far away from what I did in my since my teenage years. And I also started to publish comics in Yugoslav press in the mid-80s. So I started to experiment a little bit with self-publishing and with comics and trying to find my own language. And it all somehow has erupted in that dramatic time of the early 90s in the Balkans. And maybe it's also the reason that I was so much involved with the underground, let's say, way of thinking. Okay, so we are going to noticing awareness. I was aware just in the late 80s of some of the do-it-yourself American comics, because most of them were coming from the States. I also had some of the French comics of that time. It was only just starting in France, this do-it-yourself scene, and a little bit from England as well. So from the start, I was aware that people were doing their own alternative or mini comics, or call it small press as they call it in England. You can call it any way you want, but I was aware that it's possible to do that, and I wanted to know more, and that's the reason why I originally created my mini comics as a means of exchange. I was sending it to other people who were doing their stuff. Their own mini comics, because I wanted to learn more about that scene and about what was going on and what was happening. And at that moment, I also was getting more introduced to the American underground comics as well. And especially, I was interested into work by Robert Crumb and people like Jay Lynch, to whom I wrote in the, I think, late 80s or something like that. And I had the response from him, and that was very important for encouraging me in the first place to start working on my own comics. And later, Crumb was very influential. I think it's one of the most important artists of our age, and he's a kind of a Picasso of comics, very important for everyone who is into comics of this way or another, in this way or another. But first as an influence, because he influenced so many people ever since he started to make comics. And yes, I used Fact Sheet 5. I think it was somebody who gave it to me, a friend from Belgrade or something like that. And it was important start for myself. I can't remember if it was late 80s or early 90s, but anyway, I learned that there were other people doing their own mini comics, and I started to exchange my own stuff for their products, and it was quite interesting, especially because I didn't know much about that scene, and I was learning right through these exchanges. And I also started to advertise in some of the publications which were advocating the exchange of small press at that moment. And I was getting in touch with a really nice community that I learned is out there. First in the States and in Canada and in other countries. So it was, for me, first I learned about the American scene, the North American scene, and only later I learned, and gradually I learned about the European alternative comics. And I was the one who actually animated the local scene. So we are coming to the section called community. At first, I was mostly sending letters to the cartoonists and editors in the States, and that's how my circle of friends connected to comics was made. And it was really exciting because I learned that a lot of these authors were quite easy to approach and very open, and with some of them I retained friendship for a lifetime, I should say. So it was a lot of people in the States. It was of course Jay Lynch and Robert Crumb. As I said, they were the great influence. And with Crumb, I am still in contact and still exchanging a lot of thoughts and ideas. And I was his host when he came to Serbia, and we met in France as well. And I had a very profound communication with Jim Woodring and Mark Martin, who were doing at that time tantalizing stories, but also with people like Chris Ware and Bob Catman, the cartoonist who was very active, whom I actually met through Weirdo by Crumb. We started to exchange letters, and together we edited the book, which turned out to be the last edition, which came out with Kitchen Sink Press ever. Before they closed, they published an anthology of dream-related comics named Flock of Dreamers, and it was co-edited by Bob Catman and myself. And I had a number of friends in Seattle. I was there in 1999, shortly after the bombing of Serbia, and I met Pat Moriarty and David Lasky and many others. And it was a kind of a circle of friends which stayed for years. Also in Europe, I made a lot of contacts, especially in Italy and in France. And now you can say that this idea of mini comics and alternative comics is present in many different parts of the world. Not just in the States, as it was in the late 80s or something like that. So I was born in the early 60s, and there were other cartoonists who were of my age, active at that point in time when I was getting in contact with the North American scene. Julie Doucet was one in Canada, for example. She was also into self-published comics. And I also did a lot of collaborations with different cartoonists, but I also self-published the book, which was called Jamming with Aleksandar Zograf. I think it was from the early 2000s, and it includes a lot of people from different countries, from Thierry Guittard from France to Robert Crumb from US, and Lee Kennedy from UK, many others. And it was... for me, it was always a pleasure to do the collaborative comics, and I never stopped. Actually, I was getting a lot of feedback through this kind of thing. And I started to work with the young people in Serbia, and originally it was in my town, and because of the fact that I didn't have any kind of institutional help in the 90s, during the Milosevic's regime, I started to do my comic workshops, which were called kuhinja, which means the kitchen, in my own kitchen. So it's enough if you have a small place in your flat and a big enough table. You can invite the number of people and you can speak to them about comics and you can make comics with them. That was the idea. I mean, to just try to infect some younger people with comics, and I think it was a kind of a success because there was a group of people who would gather every Saturday and discuss comics and work on comics together. And about the distribution, I was basically I started to trade my mini comics with the authors, as I said, first from the States and then from the other parts of the world. And also some of the issues were distributed in some of the stores, with especially in the States, and also in France and Italy and other countries, but some of the small comic book stores, they would had a small selection of do-it-yourself comics, and they would sell some of my mini comics that way. And the distribution actually worked very easy because you just put it in the, you wrap it in an envelope and send it all over. And I think the funny thing is that, I forgot to say that, is that when I did the first edition of Alas Comics, I sent it to several people that I found and I found their addresses in magazines like Fact Sheet 5, or I just in pre-internet time I stumbled across their information somewhere, maybe in some other fanzines. But when they received the copies of my mini comic, they sent it to other people. Some of them were the editors, and so the first issue of Alice Comics, which was published in I don't know how many copies, maybe overall number could be through some years or like 100 or 200 copies, but a lot of people would multiply their copies and send it to friends and to editors. And it soon started to be reprinted in many different magazines and editions, ranging from fanzine to the real book production. I remember that Jay Lynch, he gave it to one of the free magazines from Chicago, and it was published right from the start in thousands of copies. Then there was a comics compendium, the book published in Canada, which published several thousand copies. So I remember that I was the overall print run of all this was I think could be measured in tens of thousands of copies. So it was something that came out by a small guy from a small country in a big trouble, but it was distributed all over, and it had some impact on the other people who were just starting to make their own comics in Serbia as well, and in other parts of Europe. So it was kind of interesting how these things happened even without my will. I never had the idea that this will happen. I mean, I did it honestly just to get some mini comics for a trade, and that I will learn something about what was going on that scene. And the thing that I'm missing, so we are getting to wrap up. The thing that I'm missing about from that time, I think it's maybe the regular post. Now it's kind of forgotten. Snail mail is almost an ancient thing that nobody is using. And you know what's also funny is that in the pre-internet time, you would very often get a response from the people to whom you wrote to. And in modern times, with all these multitudes of contemporary means of communication, sometimes it takes time to get a response, or some people, they just never respond at all. So somehow it turned out that that good old time was somehow functional, that it worked good for the comics, especially for the mini comics and for this production, which was quite interesting. And one anecdote, if it could be called that way, is that one of the mini comics was made. I was speaking about that to a friend. I was a lot of people. I mean, one of the things that interested me were dreams and how you can transpose dreams into comics. I think it's a very exciting question, and right from the late 80s I was working on that, and at some point when I exchanged numbers of my mini comics, a lot of people were telling me, and when I was doing these dream comics, and publishing them in various publications, especially in the States, a lot of people told me about their dreams that they had featuring myself. So I asked some of them to make comics about myself being in their dreams. So one of the edition of Alas Comics was actually made up of these dream adventures which other people had, with myself being the main character, or the character who appears in their dreams. It's a kind of bizarre situation, because it shows that even the dream exploration could be an international thing, and it can overcome the barriers, and it can produce an enormous exchange of ideas, which I think is very healthy and very good thing, and it provides a lot of additional communication between people from many different surroundings. And in the early 2000s, we are now moving from the 90s, I have started another series of mini comics, if it could be called that way, and it's called Hypnagogic Review. It's just a collection of my images from half dream state, and I still have these visions. I produced several years ago the latest issue of Hypnagogic Review, but I'm continuing to publish them occasionally in my in the comics which I do now for Serbian magazine called Vreme. It's an independent political magazine, basically. But every week I produce 2 pages of comics for them, and it's been going on for 20 years by now. So it's thousands of pages of comics which were never actually read in English. But anyway, it's a great opportunity to actually speak to the wider audience, to the national audience, and it all came from the mini comics people. My regards to you. Bye.
Thanks for listening. This is the 80s, 90s pre-internet mini comics oral history archives. This is a project of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find out more about this project or about the courses we offer, the programs we offer in comics and visual literacy and graphic novels at sawcomics.org. That's SAWCOMICS.org. You can find out how to support this project through the donate button. You can also support us on Patreon at Saw Comics. You can find more of this on our YouTube channel or through various places where you get your podcasts. You can find archives of this at the University of Florida and at our other partner institutions. And waving at you from the past, this is Tom Hart, the director of the Sequential Artists Workshop. Thanks so much for listening.